Hit, nudge, nudge.
Hit, nudge, nudge. Okay.
Okay, no more.
Reboot. Reboot. Once again, we have Andrew as our speaker for the basic tutorial this evening. And Andrew has prepared a wonderful presentation for us on the Linux Foundation. So I will turn it over to Andrew.
I spent 20 minutes on this one, so it's much better than my previous ones.
All right. Yay.
So how we did you
Start it.
Okay, good.
Yay.
Okay, I'm going to jump over here and test this out. So we're going to talk about the Internet Peacekeepers. Okay, how many of you guys are familiar with the Linux Foundation and what it has become today? How many of you looked it up today because I'm going to do a talk about it? Okay, so the Linux Foundation just started the Core Infrastructure Initiative, and this is kind of off of the heels of a problem you're aware of and a problem you're not aware of. Okay, this is off the heels of the Heartbleed bug in OpenSSL, and this is a situation where they realized that the problems with OpenSSL weren't because of bad developers, it was because there was only one developer for like a year. They had literally nobody to look over anything. And so this is basically a big funding project. Okay, so this project is formed with a lot of big names. All of these big names are putting in some big dollar amounts, 6, 7 digits long. Okay? So how often do you see these types of names in the exact same sentence? Have you ever seen Huawei and VMware in the same line? Probably never.
Usually it says something about patent infringement.
Right.
That's the phrase.
And usually there's a V between each one of those names.
Yeah, or VS, or yeah, V dot. So this is an important thing here. This is where the Linux Foundation is coming in and acting as the arbitrator. All of these companies want to fund this project. All of them want it to get a lot of control and to get all these problems fixed. But they all want to do it their way. So the Linux Foundation comes in and says, hey, let's just create a generic fund. We already have plenty of other projects. One of them is the Linux Kernel. We know what we're doing. And let's just set this up as a generic project. So the mission of the Core Infrastructure Initiative is a multi-million-dollar project housed at the Linux Foundation to fund open source projects that are in critical path for core computing functions. They are acting like Switzerland here. Okay? So you've got, a lot of fighting going on about, whether people are forking OpenSSL, whether they're trying to redo this, and the core problem that started this whole initiative is actually much scarier than OpenSSL. And we're going to talk about that, okay? It's something I've been involved with for a while. So as an advisory board, it has these nerds involved, okay? You'll recognize some of these names, but I guarantee you every single one of these names is somebody that you should know. These are the people protecting the internet today. Is that a question or an itchy ear?
Itchy ear.
Okay. Carry on. So, Alan Cox, a lot of you guys know him. He was the binocular kernel developer. He had the servers in so many places, he actually had to sit at his desk with binoculars and see if their screen was doing something. You'll know Evan Logan. You'll know Ted So. I hope you guys know Ted So.
Tell us about it.
Yeah.
Ted So was the first kernel committer in the U.S.
Ooh.
When was
Is that so?
Yeah.
That's so.
That's so.
Okay.
And who is Evan?
Hmm?
Tell us about Evan.
We will look at their individual accomplishments in a little bit. So, if you don't recognize some of those names, I'm saying that you should probably go out and look at how these people are protecting your freedoms beyond the net neutrality, because that number 2 problem there will make you never want to use the internet again. Okay, so the straw that broke the camel's back, you had the Heartbleed. Heartbleed wasn't that big of an impact. What it was a big media impact. This was Fox News saying open source software is evil. Okay? Buffer bloat has yet to hit the media. And this is the massive, massive. And then security in general. These are the things that kind of broke the back and said, we need to get back on this. We need to make the internet stable. We need to make the core stable. Okay? So Heartbleed was very high profile. You had every news organization. You even had all the St. Louis newspapers had an article about it, right? I mean, everybody was getting a piece of this pie. It was like an election. I mean, it was, everybody wanted a bit of this. It was preventable. It was. I mean, whether they actually had more eyes, more hands, or more people, it was preventable. It was an underfunded team. And it doesn't have to be funding in the form of raw monetary dollars. Hosting servers, or a comfortable place to go work, or a place to have your meeting, like Gray Bar offers us. A lot of finger pointing. What's the first thing they did when they found this bug? They went and chased down the guy who contributed it. Did a lot of finger pointing. And if they looked a little bit carefully, they would see there was like 3 emitters for that year. So it was kind of embarrassing.
So they just look at the last check-in, say, we got you.
Yeah, well, they looked for that code check-in, and it was a situation where you're pointing the finger, and then if you look at it from the 10,000-foot view, you realize, oh, there was only that guy and 2 of his friends. Nobody else was doing anything. Okay, and legacy code. So one of the first things that happened with OpenSSL is some people went in there and tore out a lot of legacy code. VAX support in OpenSSL. I'm sorry, here you go. So this is the scary guy. How many of you guys have heard of buffer bloat before? How many of you have heard of it because I told you about it? How many of you guys are running the investigation nodes? Anybody? These big monster routers are queuing TCP packets during the day. So in New York, you have these big routers, and all this traffic's flew through New York. And during the day, this TCP queue starts shifting the packets into its queue so far back that fun things like NTP, going over UDP, actually get stuffed up. So you have clock drift in the middle of the day. So much that financial trading is affected. Okay? That's scary. There's been buffer bloat queuing measured that would push NTP to the point where even DHCP leases would fail. Okay? Crazy stuff. We're probably not getting impacted here in St. Louis, but maybe you're a day trader and you're getting your feed and it's going through New York and Chicago and everything, and you'll notice the latency in concept kind of showed up, and realized that protocols like NTP and a couple others weren't really capable of handling a router in the middle caching everything. They were expecting end-to-end. They were expecting home LAN network. They were expecting those speeds. This was preventable. But, there wasn't the resources, the funding, what have you. It's also very difficult to study. We're talking about massive bandwidth over very specific networks. Okay, so if you go to bufferbloat.net, you can have a read-up about this entire problem. There's also a WRT in node that you can use at your home, and it will report back the statistics throughout the day to report back your speed, NTP time drift, all kinds of fun stuff. It will do queuing tests. We'll actually send packets at particular times and test the queuing through particular routes. Anyone have any questions? I think I'm going through that.
site?
Huh?
What's that site?
Bufferbloat.net. So how many of you guys are familiar with TCP queuing and what it is? Nobody? Okay. So TCP queuing, TCP allows you to control your packet flow to the point where you can actually buffer your TCP packets whenever you have congestion. So we've got people like Comcast that are squeezing the little throttle on all their customers. They're actually doing TCP queuing to the point that their customers, NTP servers, their customers, other types of servers will be impacted by the queue rate. So for example, let's just imagine you're doing some async or some sync connection with some service, or you're getting a dual feed, financial feed. You will see that shift where one of your financial ticks. Are you guys familiar with the dual feed type financial service? In finance industry, you typically get 2 feeds of all prices for all stocks streaming at you at once. And if they differ, you ask yourself why. Okay, this is very standard stuff. Most of the high-end companies will put in dedicated links, separate links, so that they can get dual feeds to make sure they have the absolute fastest connection, the absolute best information. Because when you're doing high volume, high speed trades, it matters.
Do they use dual links also for regulatory, where they have to cross compare? I know there's a lot of regulations for the financial trading industry, or is it just speed reliance?
This is a situation where speed is more important than anything else in the world. But the validity of the information is also very important. So instead of running checksums, it's actually just more affordable to buy 2 links. SSH, I'm going entirely too fast, I'm sorry. SSH, OpenSSH was deemed one of the projects to work on. It works great. Don't touch it. That's the attitude right now. Legacy code base and testing and auditing. So SSH is a very similar situation. The OpenSSH project is a very similar situation as the OpenSSL and NTP projects, where they just work. And that's the problem. Nobody cares. They just
Somebody's looking at it.
Yeah. So this is a situation where, you know, SSH works great for you, but there could be some exploit for your RSA key during handshake. And it just hasn't been discovered because there's not enough eyes on the project, there's not enough hands on the project, and maybe there's not enough funding or support, or, you know, maybe they don't have nice places to meet like here. So the first round of funding went directly to NTP, OpenSSL, and OpenSSH, with the focus on the NTP project. The OpenSSL, some of the developers have already received some funding, support, equipment, resources. The NTP Bufferbloat and a couple of these other projects have been ongoing, and they're trying to fix these problems very, very fast. So yes, you can go and donate $5 or $50 or $500. This is the quote-unquote internet fund, because if NTP fails, we're boned. If OpenSSL fails any harder than it already has, we're boned. Microsoft is one of the investors because Microsoft uses OpenSSL. So it's not like there's anybody that's purely immune to this stuff. So the Linux Foundation, again, is a very large organization right now. They host very large projects. They have Open Daylight, which is the software-defined networking project. So this is HP and all these big companies out there making standardized switches and then loading Linux distro on it for software-defined network. Okay? They pay all the super nerds to do the code. So Theodore So and Venus and a bunch of these guys, they are employees, partners, fellows, they are part of this foundation. And plus the penguins are cute. So if you want, there's some of the projects there. There's a project called Open Llama, which I really suggest you guys take a look at. It's the next iteration of enterprise service buses, MPI type work. So this is one of the situations where the Linux Foundation is encouraged over and over and over again to take on these big problems. And this is where Linus is working on a lot of things. How many of you guys have watched the introductory to Linux videos that Linus did? So very recently, he has done a series of videos where he himself is introducing end users over video into the world of Linux.
On YouTube?
Yes, they're on YouTube. He even reads mean tweets about himself. So they're doing a lot to try to jump back to the end user community and get them more involved. Because you guys may not be security experts, but your eyes on these projects would probably help. Okay, I think that's it for that one. Did I go too fast? Yes, I did. I'm sorry?
Where are you at on LibreSSL?
I'm sorry? The Libre, the fork?
Yeah.
It's a distraction is the problem. So if the primary project is there, it's open, and why they are distracting from the problem is actually the problem. This is actually why I see the problem. So you have a project that's rolling wrong, somebody doesn't like something, they pull the fork, and they divide the developers or they divide the resources.
Well, no, the point was the fork was done long before the foundation got involved. And you'd think that it would make sense to try and take advantage of those resources. But no, everybody's got their nose in here. They're never going to talk to anybody in Canada.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of politics and a lot of background going on. And the Linux Foundation is simply in an arbitrative point of view, arbitrative funding point of view. And they want to make sure that regardless of who the developers are, if they need to start kicking developers, that's one thing. It's a different problem.
Well, but that's the point. As a neutral intermediary, do you think there's any chance that they can overcome some of these political issues?
Yes, that's kind of their goal in life, is to overcome. So the Linux Foundation became extremely prevalent whenever some projects from Qualcomm and Huawei and HP came up, where they all wanted to work on something with the Linux kernel. But they all wanted to have their little developers hammer away at it. And everybody was doing a very good job of coding, but a very bad job of politics. Okay? And so a lot of these projects have come up to this point where it's... So, for example, some of these projects are impacting, like for example, this is installed on, no, I think it's like 60% of all TVs.
Yeah, but they're introducing it into some of the mobile market, right?
Right. But I mean, the impact of this particular project is absolutely huge. But to get these TV vendors to work together at first, this was the first driver, it was just impossible. They're all trying to write their own stuff. And it was actually creating a lot of problems. Open Daylight is a project here where you can actually buy a switch from vendor X. Let's just say you buy one of these HP Open Daylight switches. You can install this Linux distribution that does software-defined networking to the point where you can have BGP at the server level. So you can actually handle failovers and people tripping on cables at the data center level. And as you can see, a lot of people are interested in this. You've got networking vendor, server maker, just huge companies that want to make a software-defined network solution that works across everything and not have to go arm wrestling with each other. How many of you guys expected to see all these people working on a project? I mean, we've got Avaya and Huawei right there. We've got Oracle working as a team. That's an accomplishment. So OpenMama is a fun project. I advise you all to take a moment to play with this. This is a pretty big enterprise service bus type messaging queuing system. You have the open virtualization. This is open virtualization. You might know it as KVM. This is the marketing department behind KVM at the moment. So they're talking about how Linux can be used to partition hardware versus adding that abstraction layer of a virtualization layer like VMware. And Xen, of course, is here. And there's a bunch of other smaller projects. So this is the stuff. And I advise you guys all to take a few moments and look at it and jump over there. And, I don't know. There's the donation form. You can donate a PayPal button. Yeah, with the PayPal button, apparently. Yeah, it's all PayPal.
Yeah. That's very nice. It's copyrighted.
Yeah, we'll have to complain to them about that one. Okay. Let's see. Any questions about the Linux Foundation in general?
There's what is it, 6 people on the board?
The board? No, I imagine. Let's see here. Tell me if you see it before me.
What about us? Board members.
Yeah, there's a few more than 6. So. Yeah, there's a few people.
Okay.
Darby is on there. That's cute. Damn Fry.
And yeah, that was the next question. So then they have positions called staff. So how many staffers are there?
Okay, so Amanda here, she's the marketing like awesomeness person. She's the one that gets Linus to read mean tweets about himself.
Oh.
Okay, a lot of these people are another communications girl. Andy Undergrove. So fellows, are you guys familiar with the concept of a fellow in various business and
Like a tenure
academic?
professor,
Yeah.
Or emeritus is somebody who's managed to get patents out that make money for his company.
Huh?
It tends to go hand in hand with it.
So there, some of these fellows, so you guys know this guy right up here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oopsie. Greg here, you might know him from some of his smaller projects like CoreOS, the Linux Kernel. He does a lot of awesomeness. Purdy, I've actually never seen that name before. Huh, okay.
Well, one thing missing are, core distro members. No one actually under SUSE. What about Red Hat?
Oh, here, I think it was over here. You're talking about some of these peoples?
No, on the board, there's only one board member that belongs to Linux. That belongs to a major distro. Alan Clark and SUSE. I was curious if there's a reason why Red Hat didn't participate. More politics.
you would know him as a Debian project leader for many years.
He's also a rocketry buff. He was at our St. Charles log about 5 years ago.
Yeah, I count 5 Linux representatives on the list.
But I'm saying there's no Red Hat rep.
Yeah, there's no Red Hat.
There's only one vendor rep up there, and that's Susie.
How do you see this? Because I see some other vendors.
There's only one guy.
I see Oracle Linux represented here.
Right. I'm saying there's only one major distro with a named person on the board, and that's Susie.
Okay.
I wonder why there's no Red
So
Hat.
HP UX and everything is represented there. You have your IBM down here, Dan Fry. I don't know if you guys know Dan. And
No, that wasn't the question.
Debian.
Is there a political issue between Linux Foundation and Red Hat?
No, these are the people that volunteer their time. These are not paid fund positions.
Okay.
This is a foundation,
So
pretty
there's-
much like the SLUUG.
So there's no politics there, like there are.
Yeah,
other
it's not like getting bonuses politics.
No, but there's political issues between the OpenBSD crew, which tend to be an issue anyway, and OpenSSL, okay, because the fork is proceeding, et cetera, and there's political issues there. I'm saying, are there any political issues between the Foundation and Red Hat? Because there's nobody on the board for Red Hat.
I can't imagine that, as they're involved with most of these projects.
Okay.
That's something, we can obviously ask, but.
Well, I mean, it's not worth asking. I'm just saying, so you're saying you don't know any political issues there?
No, Linus and a bunch of the developers and the system administrators, they do get paid. Most of these people are not here for the money. This is a foundation.
No, it's not a pay issue. I'm just saying, there's obviously a lot of political things here that people are tripping over right now. And I just want to make sure you didn't know anything between Red Hat and the Foundation, since there wasn't a Red Hat person before.
No, it could just be an arbitrary limit on the number of board members, maybe.
Okay, that's fine.
Non-for-profits and board members, you hit the maximum limits, you can't necessarily.
Well, if somebody was contributing significant sum of money, normally they'd make a seat for them. So either Red Hat isn't contributing enough money to get a board seat, or there's a political problem, or they just aren't involved for some reason.
Yeah, I don't think buying seats is really kind of the thing they're up for.
It does seem a bit out of place that they wouldn't be,
Representative.
and it wouldn't have a vested interest, because they certainly do.
Yeah, and several of these members, so as you see, this guy's not even representing a single company at all. He's representing himself.
He's
So-
for a good time.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is that, if you dig into some of these, we might be able to find Red Hat on one of these pages where he was a past VP. Okay, so if you guys have this page open, just do a quick search and tell me if you find that.
I was just looking at the title. There was.
Yeah. And that's the thing, you've got Dan here, who's done darn near everything.
Now, there's no Red Hat on the page.
Okay.
Or perhaps Red Hat is satisfied with one of the members present that.
Yeah, and that's entirely possible. You're going to notice that Red Hat's a good example, but you're going to notice there's going to be other niches where there's pretty much no representation, and they may be, like you said, satisfied, or they may represent in another way. I don't see Red Hat getting any money into this.
Yeah, they were.
It was there. So they're alphabetical.
Where?
It's on the left, right next to React.
Yeah, right.
Ah, there we go, React, okay. So, yeah.
In the landscape.
Yeah, back to that topic though. It's Red Hat is not Linux. Red Hat is just a part of this community. Maybe these guys are throwing more money at it, but I don't think buying seats is the way that the project and the foundation is moving forward. So we've got Ubuntu down here. So. But you'll see surprises like D-Link, for example.
They use the kernel in their routers.
Right, but what is going on though is that they're also seeing that these are companies that notoriously do not donate to a lot of things, but they're donating time or energy or money to make sure that they can make one of their developers useful to a project.
Well, I think is what goes on more often than not, at least where I was working last, and that is if Red Hat had a problem and its primary development team that was doing customer, let's just call them customer representatives, let's say somebody, let's say from where I work, Amdocs, had a problem with Linux in a particular situation. In the case of OpenSSL, they would report the problem and eventually either to Red Hat or to whoever, and it would, bubble or surface in some way that it would get to the proper people. That's the only way to, present it. If somebody's aware of a problem, it gets reported, and then it interpolates upward.
Another aspect of the Linux Foundation I forgot to mention earlier is they are the host organization for a lot of the large conferences. So, like OSCON, your Cloud Open, Linux Con. They have an automotive Linux summit, which I think is pretty cute. So basically, this is getting your GM, which is putting the GPL in their owner's manual that's in the glove box now. Kind of cute. So if you know anybody that has a brand new GM car, get their owner's manual out. The GPL's in the back page. Pretty cute.
Jaguar is on the board of directors.
I'm sorry?
Jaguar Land Rover is on the board of directors.
Who owns Jaguar?
Who does?
Ford, I think, right? But yeah, there's lots of events, and there's also other fun things. So none of these, I don't think there's anything in St. Louis, of course. But we can write lots of letters of petition that they have one here.
Chrysler isn't on the list?
I'm sorry?
Chrysler and Ford are on the list?
Chrysler would be down on it. It's no longer Chrysler.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah. Would be the fringe organization.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Fiat, I thought.
Yes, yeah.
Lots of fun
Okay,
stuff.
so of the staff people,
Okay.
how many of these people are actually being the fingers on keyboards, the coders, as it were, and how many of them are coordinators, project coordinators?
I can tell you I have several friends that work there that are not on this list. This list is not exhaustive.
Okay.
So for example, I think the 4 administrators for the kernel org Anycast network are not on this list.
This is going to be the most visible people, probably.
Yeah, these are the.
And it says management, it doesn't say team members.
Yeah. We've got fellows, and so I have quite a few contacts, and occasionally I find things and help out and fix things. But you're going to find that the team running kernel.org, which is Anycast around the world, and it's mirroring everything, including the Linux kernel Git repositories. They are busy all the time. So they've just recently put a whole lot of equipment into China, and that was not easy.
So what's the overall gross budget for the Linux Foundation?
Put your $5 in right here.
I'm sure that
It falls under the financial regulations of
$5
disclosure.
if you go to PayPal right now.
Disclosure for the investment, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's all there. That's not something I was really targeting. But it's just a big SLUUG. That's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
A massively big SLUUG.
Lots of Indians.
Well, but I guess where my question is driving is the comment I put in the discuss list on May 29th. They assigned 2 full-time people to be on the OpenSSL project. So I guess I'm wondering, how many
Each one of these
full-time
yeah.
people does the foundation have and how much of their work is being delegated out to either volunteers or third-party company
Right.
Contributed programs.
So each one of these projects is probably looking at the tens of millions in investment, but it could go to infrastructure, PR. So for example, Open Virtualization Alliance is basically a big PR push for KVM. We have KVM installed on almost all of our machines that are Linux. We don't really think about it. However, the commercial customers out there, they need PR. So this is a situation where a project might get money that goes to marketing and presentation versus the coders. It's a different mix. So this is a situation where it needs a home.
Ego in that list has lost quite a bit of traction.
Right. And there's going to be wins, there's going to be losers. I mean, it's like an angel investor. You're not going to get them all.
But I'm trying to get a sense for how active this organization is. In other words, how many people does it have, both that it itself has, how many people is it influencing in contributed time from corporations, how many people has it got just as volunteer effort?
I'm sure we can probably just look this up. Where are we at? You're exceeding my 20 minutes of research and writing.
Don't suppose you mind
Okay.
bumping that screen about 4 notches? Sure, we can see it.
I can see it.
Much better. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So Brian Prophet is no longer part of this group, so he's no longer there. Yeah, I need to have him update that.
Okay, I didn't want to put you on the spot. I'm just.
Oh, no. These are
See if there's
actually questions which I would really expect somewhere next to this bylaws. It's showing like the last meeting notes,
Mm-hmm.
But this is the fun stuff that we just love to read in our spare time.
If you can stay awake.
If you can stay awake.
Yeah.
If I had better sound, I'd probably play it for you.
How long is it?
Okay.
How long is it?
It's 50 seconds long.
Play it.
No, go for it.
No, my audio is really horrible. So.
We'll be real quiet. We'll be real quiet.
Oh no, it's really horrible.
Alrighty.
Like I'm sure I damaged the speakers already. It's
Anybody got speakers in their bag?
that's okay.
Anybody have speakers in their bag?
Well, you guys have plenty of laptops here. I'm sure you could all search for Linus reads mean tweets and actually play it locally.
Linus what mean tweets?
Linus
Tell you what,
reads mean tweets.
During the break, we'll see if somebody can fire it up on a laptop that has speakers, and those who want to hear it can pick up on that. In the meantime, any other questions in reference to
tweets?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew. Yay. All right. We're in that creamy middle of the Oreo cookie, that part of the meeting where we do the announcements, the general Q&A, and then a short break before we get to our main feature presentation. Coming off an announcement related to something that Andrew mentioned, KVM. Next Wednesday lunch is the SLUUG meeting. Nobel group, part of our group, and the topic is KVM and SUSE's contributions to it. Or SUSE's use of it, I guess I should say. So, but anyway, it should be a good presentation. It's always a good lunch, and if you come, the lunch will be provided. That's next Wednesday.
Pretty good show also.
Pardon?
Pretty good show also.
Pretty good show also. So Wednesday lunch, check the calendar for the details on the where and the when. Let's see, other announcements. Next Thursday is the St. Louis SLUUG meeting, and I forget the topic.
Well, we have this thing called
The calendar.
a calendar, which is actually open somewhere.
There it is.
Bigger,
Huh?
bigger.
Oh, there's nothing there.
There's nothing specific.
Somebody tried to update it.
We do have a topic. I think we do.
There you go. Something.
Lee is presenting SUSE experience, and Ken Johnson is presenting a first look at Mint.
Cool. That's why Lee was saying bigger, bigger.
Yeah, that's better.
Isn't he cute?
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, when are we going to have our tuck sewing party? You said you had a pattern for it.
Okay, yeah, I did a couple, and they're very fun and everything.
But not very good.
No, they're okay. The eyes are not as easy as I wanted them to be. So it's like a felt white circle, felt black oval type thing. But then when you go to attach it, no matter what you do, it looks bad. So they have some flexible glue that's supposed to go around the edges so it bends and stuff, but otherwise the eye pops off. And that's not awesome. See, the eyes need to stay attached there.
Maybe we could find some honeys to stitch them on for it.
Well, no, I'm no problem sewing them up. It's just it looks bad if you sew it. If you hot glue it, it breaks off.
Now it starts looking a little bit like Bill the Cat. You know, it just goes, ah! You know? No, that's a software plug. Okay.
How about a permanent Sharpie?
Draw it on.
Yeah, I don't think that'd look good. I'm using a nice felt plush material, so that's the thing. Is this material is awesome. Nothing sticks to it, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Except for the eyes.
Yeah.
Okay, also by way of announcement, tomorrow at lunch at the History Museum, there's talk on the use of drones in journalism. Basically, the quadcopter things, things about this big that you can mount a camera on.
I thought you meant the journalists.
Pardon me?
That were the drone.
Thought they'd be writing.
Yep, there's a number of reporters that, according to their paycheck, feel that that's about what they're doing. Yes. Yeah, it actually made for some interesting, odd things that you wouldn't have thought of, because the FAA, up until this last couple of weeks, there's been a prohibition against the commercial use of drones. But then they did things like use drones, the news media used drones to photograph the damage from the tornadoes in Oklahoma here this spring and stuff like that.
Does the NRA get to use them for ski?
Probably also,
Probably,
yes.
yeah. There's no restriction on that, I'm sure.
But anyway, the news organizations that were using pictures from drones got in trouble because technically that's a commercial use of drones, and it obviously wasn't what people had thought was the intended meaning of that restriction. But anyway, in the last 2 weeks, the FAA has just come out with 2 proposals for allowing the commercial use of drones, but that's all in process. Let's see, other things. What else am I forgetting as far as announcements?
Well, I added the DevOps St. Louis here on the 4th Thursday of the month, which is a brand new meeting. We had the first meeting last month, and a lot of people showed up. It was pretty nice.
And don't be concerned if you go to Google Maps, because right now the address is a vacant lot. But they claim there's a new building.
No. It's an old building to the south there that's been renovated completely.
You mean the one that was boarded up on Google?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, I removed, the Drupal users had 2 meetings, so I talked to the Drupal guys and we removed one.
Ah, excellent.
So there was one on the 3rd Thursday and one on the 4th Thursday. And they had been meeting on the 3rd Thursday, and the meetup page said the 3rd Thursday, so
Ah, okay.
it was a typo.
Okay. Excellent.
So we're awash for meeting adjustments.
Okay. Okay. By the way, if anyone is handy at this kind of stuff, I mean, we're definitely looking for, many fingers make light work. So it's like we're looking for people to either help write some code to go out and visit various websites and find the stuff that should be on this calendar and download it, or even if you're just interested in things on the calendar, just to help manually go in and edit some of this stuff.
And if you could go to each and every one of these events and report back, that'd be great.
That's it.
Especially when we have 4 separate things.
You gotta work really well.
There you go. You should let me off the hook.
Yeah. Okay, any other announcements? I'm sure I'm forgetting something. I'm going to suddenly jump up and remember.
We've got a projector now.
We got a projector.
So now if you want to come to one of the meetings and do your presentation, you don't have to, your presentation doesn't get scrunched and your console doesn't
But
get
check
scrunched.
first to make sure somebody's bringing the projector.
Mhm.
To that meeting,
To that meeting.
since we have 4 or 5 meetings.
So if you're presenting and they're not bringing the projector, you're gonna have to show up.
No, you need to find a projector.
Because we can get a light, you can do hand shadows.
Does it have an HDMI in?
Yes, it does.
HDMI and VGA,
And S-Video and RCA and,
if you have any use for that.
yeah. Come on, S-Video is awesome.
It's analog. We'll do 1920.
Well, I have a small announcement. We had some cups given to us. Someone had some printed up with the State Farm logo and some State Farm numbers and information. And they just had way, way, way more than they could ever use. So there's 20 of them back here. If anybody wants one of them or 20 of them.
So you guys are 3-card money.
So is anybody throwing a keg or anything? You know,
There you go.
You can have a real brouhaha.
there you go.
Solution doesn't want to carry it home.
We probably hit the lights, Andrew, so nobody falls asleep in the break.
I think that's an excellent idea. We've already got the start on a good kegger here, so it's like.
There we go.
Okay.
You could have got rid of them just by bringing them home.
I actually thought about that.
Could we bring that slide as well as
I did.
talking about the
Anything else on that calendar that I'm missing, forgetting? You need to highlight? I don't see anything in particular. So. Okay. Just an oddity I'm going to mention. I happen to notice in Slashdot, just in the last 24 hours, Valve, which is also a member of the Linux Foundation, they've been working the last couple of years and coming out with an entirely new game console to compete against PlayStation and PS2 and all that. And but the thing is, they were using Debian Linux as the operating system for it, and they were also completely redesigning the controller to some new radical thing. And this was supposed to be the new thing that was going to revolutionize the game industry, which is why for the last 6 months people have been saying the age of Microsoft was dead, because that gaming was the only thing that's really left for Microsoft, and that was going to go all Linux. And late last night or something, Valve announced that they can't quite get that done by 2014, so it's being moved back to 2015. In the meantime, they're going to come out with a messy Windows 8.1 version of it. I don't understand all the ins and outs, but it looked like a terrible announcement. And then
They don't have much to worry about. ATI and NVIDIA are having a real flame war.
okay. And then later this morning, somebody else, I forget who it was, again this was on Slashdot, but somebody else came out with a Steam Debian Linux game. So, I mean, there's conflicting stories here going on. I'm not enough of a gamer to know what the ins and outs of this are.
Maybe they introduced some reliability issues or something like that.
Maybe.
There's been a lot of news that's been completely misreported lately. There was a news posting that made the rounds that Sergey Brin stated that Google Plus was a bad idea. This was a news posting. And when you dig down to the root of the quote, Sergey's just saying, "I'm not social."
Bad idea for me.
And it just got misconstrued until it came up saying that Google says Google Plus is a joke. And you're just like, how did you come to this?
He said, "No, I don't tweet," and so it's
Yeah, he said, "I'm not social," and it went to that. And it was just, crazy. So yeah, I've been seeing some crazy news. Always go through the Slashdot comments, at least get 10 of them in, because that's where you'll see the corrections to the full article says blah.
Okay. And let's see. With that, general Q&A.
I did get a request to bring up the names that I discussed earlier. This is a type. Is this fuzzy for you guys too or not?
It's a little fuzzy. That's fuzzy.
That's fine.
That's
Right.
good.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so Alan Cox, you guys know who he is, right?
Well, he's a long time kernel developer.
He would be like the Linux 1.0 to 2.0 type maintainer guy. So he's pretty awesome. Go ahead and just have a read through those if you can read them. If not, it's just on the frequently asked questions of the project.
Under FAQ, how do we get to that?
If you go to the core infrastructure initiative, in the front page, there's a link to questions on the front page.
Okay.
You guys know who Evan Morgan is now? He's the guy that was defending the GPL the first time.
Okay.
So he's our friend. He's a nice guy.
Excellent. By the way, jumping back on gaming for a second, we have been trying to get somebody from the St. Louis game developers group to come and do a presentation on Steam, which is this Linux base for gaming. But so far we've kind of been not getting it all lined up. So one of these days, if anybody else has a line on somebody who knows something about Steam Linux platform for gaming,
Or or whatever platform.
Isn't it cheap? Weren't they not Linux a couple years back that switched?
I don't know.
Which one?
Steam.
Oh.
Okay. Other questions? Any questions, actually? No questions. Oh, by the way, a big thank you, of course, to Valerie, not only for the nice red plastic cups, but also for the nice hot wings. So, thank you, Valerie. All right, well, hearing no questions, everybody take a 5-10 minute break and chit chat and get some hot wings, and then we will come back to hear all about IP26.
Yeah, if someone would have just brought us up, okay, they would have been
There's only 3 more weeks. Jump on it, guys.
It's actually not there, it's running as a virtualized disk, so my computer in my face figure out the virtual machine management.
You want some wings?
Started on a slideshow rather than oops.
No further questions?
Notes there.
Now I've got it here on the screen.
Okay.
I've got it kind of here in reverse.
There's slideshow, right?
It keeps opening the wrong screen.
Well, that's a technical. You have to figure it out.
Oh, I can. Let's change
You can take care of it.
I'll change the primary monitor.
Okay. What, this one? No, the laptop I got sent over to my parents, and the one before that got sent over to Britain. Yeah, they're all gone. I've got a desktop at home that's running actual SX. And the computer in the basement is running with the what is this running? Debian /Linux 7. Guess some of it's on charter. Here we go. This is a little thought. This is all the stuff I have to do whatever charter changes my IP address, because you can't get a static IP on this digital. After that, they told broker, and then there was updating the beast file, extract these services, extract these services, actually, what if you should be review HD? Probably good. Try 6. Oh, Michael.
I don't know. I'm sure that continue. It certainly has related products. If we're talking about how selling things for $1 billion.
I think that's mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
You
Oh, okay, you wanted to flip it. I thought you wanted to move it.
These people don't move it around.
Hey, a recent update to Adobe Flash came out, and I tried to install it, wouldn't install. I kept looking at it, for some strange reason, I kept thinking about it. Yes, I simply said, maybe I should try uninstalling and reinstalling it, which is what I did. And it still wouldn't install. Yeah. Yeah. Why did it install?
What's it do?
Well, they should choose for the web.
No, I mean.
Oh, the error message is basically gives them kind of weird error message. I mean, I could try it again and just post on the forum.
They wanted a store, they buy
Is
it.
it installed yours?
Is
that okay? Well, don't worry about it.
Yeah, trail that meeting?
Oh, it's just read on. Okay. With your slide is open, just read on.
Been there for,
Are you trying to talk really sweeps or whatever?
I have, although I've, I do a lot of the rides. Yeah. I could see volunteering, but it doesn't work out to where I had the time.
Gates always said he would always be better by his side. He certainly wasn't. He was late, he was in class. They looked at the rollout here. Oh, she must have been selling it. They were ladies for them.
Oh, yeah.
Not the interesting slideshow that we can follow.
Last year. And we started.
This is not Windows, this is Linux. But anyhow, well, we're looking for Flash, and it's basically, I went to the Linux Flash website, and basically have a link to download it. Yeah, well, basically, if you type in, of course, in the search bar, Flash uninstaller, Adobe Flash uninstaller, it's a general link.
If you have one full-time worker, part-time worker. She drops out the window there. Yep, so I lost 4 jobs. Thank you. But they weren't using it, they faced but people under our bodies below this much. The room all in this, oh, you're leaving, page photos there. So they don't agree. Sure.
Well, even until just now, I wasn't 100% sure, but it seems like 2 of us here.
You want a normal mouse versus the, would you like a normal mouse?
That's okay. You know, if you're selling furniture or cars, they never accept, you know. But in a job like that, I think the idea is to make things look better.
And they're saying.
So make it look more.
Give me one moment and I will.
That's about
That's the first slide right there. Which one you want? That's what it says right here.
But you're using that, yeah, I've got the front.
Yeah, no, if you go back a while.
Because they get off the street. They always slide. So if you make it apply for a 90 slide, you might as well just start. That's what you learn.
Yeah. One.
Isn't that great?
So this is your notes pages.
Yeah, those are the notes.
Oh, okay, so you want something that looks like that?
Here's what the slide.
You know, one of the things, what she used to see was.
There's the That's one.
And they go in and they.
I just start.
I don't know. Again, I apologize.
If you want to plug this in, I can start it.
It's kind of like the police investigate themselves, they have trouble, it could be not the same as somebody else.
I got it.
Also,
Sorry about that. We can only get the just the thing going on the screen. Come down.
We went to the inspection here November last year, and they did nothing. They went back to them in February, and they said, we looked into this matter, there's no problem. So he went in there, then you saw everything started, that's what. But I think the bosses get back. Some of this feel to be treated criminally. They killed them. They're kind of like Gino. We had no idea they killed 13. And the second year, so far. Well, I mean, I think you get out of his office and just show up in the hospital, walk on. I understand, like in the battlefield, these soldiers are absolutely told not to talk to these guys. You get it, and the congressman has got a top secret.
I have a little bit of extra stuff.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, all of us time, and you appreciate it. Yeah, that's not what he
Very slowly. Be careful. They need something. And this place is
Very curious.
they replaced the display. They just replaced the display and they replaced the vessel. And then finally, you know, they replaced everything. And he was always calling me, Dad, you know, they want to send me something. Finally, they said, just send it back to us. I said, I'm back, they handed it out. I mean, it was more than these folks. I mean, they were fine. Sorry, call I get the guy.
Now, we're going to church for Sunday after Christmas.
I'll tell JJ. That's a good one.
Last section.
Fourth last week. You want to see Henry the Fourth?
Okay, we're gonna get started again. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Andrew.
Tonight, David Forrest here. Everybody say hi to David.
Hi, David. Hi, David.
He's going to give us a little quick introduction to how he plays with IPv6. And this is going to be, I think, David, this is your first presentation here?
Yes.
So give him a lot of leeway and ask him really hard questions.
Don't throw anything too hard at it.
Okay.
Soft, sticky stuff.
Actually, I'm a pretty small potatoes guy compared to what goes on in this industry. I've been here a long time. I got gray hair. My first computer programming was on a paper tape on an all-whack 3E machine. Anybody here old enough to know what that was? It was a Swedish machine, vacuum tube. I think it was 4K total memory. And it was programmed by paper tape through an ASR 35, basically. That's how it went. It was pretty minimal. But my term project at Oregon State, it was college at that time, not university. There was wear my little white coat and do this little programming. And my whole term project was to take EBCDIC and convert it into ASCII, basically. And it was all done. We didn't have a real assembler, so it was all done in hex code on machine code. And you had to figure where your registers were, because there was a rotational delay in the magnetic cores, which rotated. That was our.
Oh, it was a drum.
Drum memory.
A drum that would move around. But I graduated from that after school and ended up on a Model 20, where we converted some 1400 equipment into a Model 20 IBM, which was kind of a play IBM at that point on that thing. That was kind of fun, but one of the things I did at that time, got to spend a week at RPG school, which was a court program generator. San Francisco, I love San Francisco. I got to see the movie 2001. Which realized this was in 1967. You know, so really a future coming up. But the future included a Model 30 and moved to St. Louis. And then I ended up really involved as a division controller for a multi-manufacturing building materials company. Had 18 different locations, which we controlled really through the Mac Auto XDS, or Xerox Data System, entry to the Model 85. And we ran into a linear program there where we had all of the production from the various companies and trying to bring it internal, so we'd end up with shadow value. So mine was more technical stuff, not the operation of the computers. It was a matter of punching the thing went in. 1975, the business collapsed. We were in the mobile home side of it, and the Arab oil embargo absolutely killed the mobile home industry. We were 55% of the market, and it turns out that we were 200% of the total market in 1910. So we ended up going out of business. So Citibank ended up eating about $30 million, and I became unemployed. So I became a home builder at that time. My home building projects started in 1976. I had just a little company. I actually had built one of those little home built kits, a Southwest Technical Product 6800, which had a little flex operating system that worked pretty good. But eventually I got into OS2, where I met some of the people here. We had meetings like mad in the late 80s and 90s, and then that kind of fell apart. And I ended up going to Linux with a dial D, with the idea that I could get in and do things. I had a little printer that was a 40-column wide, and I used to do all of the costing for our building project. And I actually costed about 255 of them over the last few years. But the thing got a little bit better. The OS2, I got a regular 80-column printer, so I got a full-size printer. Right now, I'm running what I would call a pretty typical small business. And this is basically, I have a Quattro Pro that runs under XP. I had an outside accountant would come in once a week, enter all the bills, pay all the stuff, and all that. Yeah, the rest of my stuff was basically done on the job site, and we used a connection back to do all of our job costing. So basically, the office itself has an ADSL now, which is really much better than what we had, and it's a 6 megahertz connection, so 6 megabits. So it's faster than the old one, which used to be 9600 baud. So it's quite a difference. I have a couple attached to that. I got some VoIP adapters that are tied into the internet. It's not part of AT&T's VoIP, but those are separate ones out of a company, VOPIO, out of California someplace. And I bought them for a couple years. They sent me a couple little adapters, and I plugged those directly into the ADSL. So they're separate, really. They're on a dynamic connection, and they seem to work pretty good. I had a little problem because I use a wireless, and I also have wired stuff. And the main thing in my office is my desktop unit. So I was running my DHCPD there to give addresses to all these people. I also had a wireless because we had wireless people that would come in. A supplier would come in with a laptop to do something. And I wanted him to get on, but I really didn't want him on my network. But he really had to be on my network because there was only one access point for the thing. So what I did is I set up a little WRT54 on the outside, and I just used it as a hub. It didn't actually run as a router itself. It just connected that onto my network, and I made my DHCP server actually put that in a separate subnet, so that I had them kind of subnetted out. I eventually changed that when I added a couple of virtual machines in there, and one of the virtual machines was an XP, so I could run Quattro Pro. So I put a little XP in a virtual machine. I put all the virtual machines in a separate network. And then I ran into connection problems from the outside. That was a big problem. Now, we had a reverse SSH presentation here. But looking at the literature, it looked to me like if I was V6, I would have an easier time connecting back and forth. So what I did is I took that main machine and I said I'm gonna set it up as the main entry point, except for the phones. Leave the phones out, but take the rest of them and put it into one machine and feed it through there. That ended up coming through a dynamic address at 9926. 99 is AT&T, and it was dynamic, and then it was natted. And I paid an extra 50% to get a small network of half a dozen IPs. So I had some outside connection, and that's all natted into the total network. I hope that understand. This is a small thing. It isn't a big thing. It is kind of interesting, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about the IPv6 connection here. Yes.
So you have multiple IPs assigned to you, is that what you're saying?
What?
You have multiple IPs assigned to you for different.
I did have,
Okay.
but what I ended up doing is I said, you know, the problem in a small company like mine, I had it all in one machine. And if anything went wrong with that machine, I lost my DHCP, I lost my name server, I lost everything. So I decided that I'd better set up a couple little satellite things. So I picked up a couple of things. I have one on VersaNet and one on DigitalOcean, you know, and that. And they're cheap. They're only $5 a month or something like that. But I stuck out a web server on one. And I said, you know, why am I doing name serving for this? The big problem is my mailer. My mailer was the big problem. And the mailer turned out to be a kind of a time consumer, and it was had some problems. It had to be up all the time. I had a secondary on the DNS made easy. So it would hold it, but not for very long. And it became kind of a problem. So I said, I'm going to change this all, and I'm thinking I'll just go to Gmail on my mailer, so that'll take care of that problem, get it off of it. Then I don't need any addresses. I can just put it all together. So that's what I ended up doing. This, however, Andrew called me and said he wanted this before I made that decision. So this was first made up all with the idea that I was on one regular IP address. I kind of adjusted. So let's move ahead a little bit and talk about it. One of the things I found out, which was really interesting from a computer guy, is that every interface that I had in all of these things has a V6 address. And the V6 address is in this FE80 block, which is like the first 10 bits of a 64-bit address, 111111101. And then once that starts, every interface is already taken care of. So you can, it's kind of like using MAC addresses and doing the addressing. So it's really kind of, I don't know what you call it, level one?
Local link.
Local links. Okay, so we'll move ahead. And it turns out the actual addresses can have other addresses with them. But what we call link local, unlike before, every link does have an actual protocol and an actual addressable address. So it turns out that you might have several different addresses on the same interface. And it's kind of interesting because some of them get confused, and it's awkward for people to really work with it. But after you're working with it, it really doesn't make any difference. You can give it a different name. And so I ended up giving them different names. Now, one interesting thing, Andrew put on the thing and talked about Chromebook. I bought a Chromebook. I thought it would give me a little better portability, if you'd say. But some things it won't do for me. I have a little problem with it. But I did get a Chromecast. Absolutely love that thing. I put it on my big screen TV out there, and it's great. But I also found that it gets an IPv6 address, and that I could log on to my Charlotte, North Carolina virtual machine and ping it. You know, which I thought was kind of interesting. I got a response from it. So I said, hey, you know, this gives me worldwide access to that internal thing, even that little Chromecast. I don't know what I could print on it, you know, with a Chromecast, but it was accessible. Now moving on, I'll have later examples of this link local, and I'm going to kind of show you the routing problems that I have. Yes.
Question: how can you ping an address? You may have to answer this, Andrew. How can you ping an IPv6 address if you haven't set up a tunnel to a hurricane or something like that?
It works
They're
great.
globally addressable.
Even if it's behind an IPv4 NAT box.
Yes.
Globally addressable.
It's just a little tunnel comes through. It comes through an IPv4 tunnel. I get this particular one came through 6 Access, which is a free tunnel broker, and it runs through a point of presence, and I'm going to go over that later, up in Chicago. But basically what happens is, from my virtual machine, which was under VersaNet, a V6 machine, I just make a ping 6, minus C, 1 or 2 pings, whatever I want to, put the address in there. I didn't have a name for it. I didn't put it in the DNS, so I had to give it a full, I had to put the full IP address in there. But it pinged right through, answer came right back. I think it was like 35 milliseconds.
But you're gonna show us how you set up the tunnel.
Pardon?
You're gonna show us how you set up the tunnel.
Yes. Excuse me, I'm practical.
No, I can say, so, but you're gonna show us how you set up the tunnel. Okay.
I never really had any good use to go to the Chromecast. but I figured I could set up the laptop to use V6, and when I get into McDonald's, I can log on in my V4, set up the tunnel, and I could get into any machine in my place on the direct addressing, and it worked great. I mean, you know, I have no problem with it. Anyway, we talked about this. I'm going to get to that one. Actually, the link local is used for a protocol they call network discovery. And what the machine does is it puts out a little local ping, and it gets the addresses of everything it's attached to. So I get a complete list of everything anytime I want to. And also, those addresses work on all of the IPv6 protocol, which is a DHCP daemon. I did add that one. Now, there was a lot of talk, and I don't know about these big companies fighting back and forth. I know that I've been in silos all my life. I've been in Microsoft, I've been in IBM's. I remember on the Model 20, he'd come in every 5 months, the SE would come in and say that you have to redo your system, and it would screw up, you know, payroll, or it would kill invoicing. I mean, I just like the idea of buying something, putting it in and running it until it blows up, you know, and then buying something else. The problem is I forget how the doggone thing runs. There's not a whole lot of people in my IT thing. I'm the president, you know, but I'm also the IT guy, and I'm also, so it's kind of interesting. But anyway, I came to the realization that this whole idea of subnetting my V6 thing is silly. I could use everything in my company with only one address, and I can get there from anywhere in the world. I said, you know, how many addresses do I need? There's like, what's it called, 14 billion addresses in my little network that they give me. 14 billion. Now, to me, that's quite a few addresses to play around with. On the other hand, for doing all my subnetting, I have the first 64 bits, which is 14 billion of those. You know, so there's pretty much no reason for me to use any kind of a system on my side. Now, when I say that, I didn't start off that way. I used to put like 2 was the name server, and 4 was, and that made it easy for me to understand and control. Well, this stateless address auto configuration is built into everything. You plug it in, and it comes up with an address. So I said, hey, you know, I should not do that. The problem was I'd already defined a few of them, so part of mine are on a fixed deal. But I'm getting rid of my DHCP and letting the machines do all of their own addressing. Like the Chromecast made its own address. You know, I didn't even know it had one, but when I did a neighborhood discovery, it said Chromecast. It gave me the address. So I thought that was kind of interesting. This is something that is really would help people. When we talk about network size, this is kind of interesting. If you take, I'm going to talk a little bit about classes, even though classes are no longer in, you know, but Class C address was 254 different addresses plus an address. They say that's about the same as one bag of M&F. Now, I said, gee, did they really say that? And this guy, Oliver DeLong, I don't know if you know him, said that. Well, I didn't even realize that they made common M&M. Here's a common M&M, and I looked at it, and I didn't open it because I was going to bring it here. But I started counting them like this, and I said, there's only about 140 in here, so you're probably wrong. So I figured I'd pass those around so you know how many addresses there are in the Class C.
We could use all the interested stuff if you pass it around.
What I guessed when I put this together, I said, you know, maybe, just maybe, I put them all together, that there was about 7 or 8 servings in there. I've seen it expressed in other ways, but they're saying that if you took those M&Ms, which are these almond ones, they are bigger than a regular M&M. There's enough addresses in the 164 thing that we get to fill all 5 of the Great Lakes. All 5 of them. I mean, that's if there's no water in them, you know, you could fill them up there. Just to give you an idea of the size of this address. On the other hand, if you took the full address space and you're only talking about V4, 124, which is kind of what they call a Class A address, would cover about 70% of a football field. I don't know how many Class A's were actually given out, but IBM got one. I think 99 was their hit. That's what 16,700,000.
You mean an 8-bit?
Yeah, regular I4.
Bits? I think there were 20 or something.
But there's not very many of them available. But IBM got one of them, and it was 16,770,000 IP addresses, of which they very, very generously charged me 50% of my access fee to give me a half a dozen addresses of those on a temporary basis. Well, what happened is this worked great for from March of last year when I put it together up until November. And in November, all of a sudden, everything stopped. I lost all my IPv6 ability completely. And when I got to checking on it, Hurricane Electric was handling it for me, and they told me that the problem is that your ISP is blocking Protocol 41, which is a protocol, and it's supposedly supposed to be V6 graphics. But they were using it. Now he's going to correct all this stuff.
No. Protocol 41 is used for a lot of protocols. It's kind of a blow through. It's like EBTP.
Have an address.
I found out from the little discussion group that IBM felt they actually made this as kind of a jump decision for them bringing out IPv6 on their 6RD method that they were going to bring out. So I decided I better go try the 6RD method. And boy, if you get a chance to try that, I'm just going to suggest you don't. I think you'd be better off.
This is what Charter offers, 6RD.
What an opportunity.
Yeah. It was a bad deal, and I spent a lot of time on it. But you know, I got a lot of time, so I did it. At any rate, what I did is I also found out that if you took all of the address spaces separate, they would also individually fill all of the Great Lakes. So if you took one of those addresses and then had another Great Lakes full, I said, how could we possibly run out? But then on April 1st, I got an email from my son, who's a professor of system engineering at Virginia. He says, you know, there was a problem, and we're looking at IPv9 now because there's been another galaxy discovered, and with all those things, we need to have those addresses. And he sent me a link that was an April 1st link.
256 bits.
But anyway, that's basically what happened as far as addresses went. Now, we have a little thing here called. Now, you know, since I live in one office by myself, I don't talk to anybody except myself. So I've got that small size. I call it cider, C-I-D-R, or maybe cedar when I looked it up. Cedar's a tree, cider's a drink, whichever way you want to look at it, you know. What it stands for is classless domain internet routing. And what it is 1993, they decided that the IPv4 thing was going to run out of space because they had figured that they could give 16 million to IBM and 16 million to Microsoft and 16 million to, I think it was Hewlett Packard at that time. So they got all these addresses, and when they got to China, there wasn't many of them left. But China has a lot of people. And so they needed to come up with some new system, and they came up with this system that would have enough for everybody.
The Chinese are more used to sharing. The Chinese are more used to sharing, so.
Well, I don't think these people are sharing very well. They could give some of these addresses back. But at any rate, what the idea now is that a single end user should get this 64-bit prefix, which is 14 billion addresses. But they want, if you're going to do a home network, you're going to actually network your second floor from the first floor to, your garage, if you will. They say the minimum insight for a home network should be a 56, which leaves the difference between 56 and 64 is 8 bits. So that's kind of like, a pretty good sized network for your home. In reality, they say that most of them, and right now I don't know anybody giving 56s out. Yeah.
Track page up.
Yeah, if you got your keyboard back.
Okay, one more. Most of them are going to be larger allocations, and what they say, right now there's a lot of places that will automatically give you a 48, and they consider that kind of the standard larger one now. So if you apply, a lot of them have automatic. I need a 48, they give you a 48. And if you needed more than that, you could move on down. But that's the typical Class D address under IPv4. So that's a pretty big chunk. That's 16,000 different network segments as far as networking. And I think you're going to handle all the networking stuff with that. Because I only have one in my house.
I'm going to cover the fun topics.
The fun topics. Now, it's interesting that these are for local internet registries. They're saying 36 bits for the front. That 36 bits is bigger than any current, than our current IPv4 network. So, we're looking at some really large numbers, and we're not using very many of them. The registries have their own, when you get down to the smaller ones, the 32, the 28, the 24, you get down here to these regional ones, down in the 12 ones, we're talking about continents, that type of thing. But we still got another bunch to go down there in the bottom, and so far they've only set up, I think, 1 or 2 public ones.
Yes, everybody's getting 32 right now.
So this is amazing how much is there, and I don't think I'm not going to live too much longer, guys. So I'm just saying that I probably won't be here when we run out. Okay, here's an example. This was my address. It was a 99. $15, but it used to be more expensive when you even got it. What I did when I put this together, I said, I'd take that whole number, I'm going to put it in the last 8 thing of my IP address. That was my plan. I didn't know anything then. I still don't know anything. But in order to convert that, if you work with hex numbers very much, it becomes obvious how to convert them. But a lot of people don't. And at the risk of being elemental here, I'm going to just show you how this worked out. If you take that 99 address, it's actually 6 times 16 plus 3. And when you take this dotted thing, it's really decimal. I'm going to convert it to hex. I convert it, so how many 16s will go into 99, and then whatever's left over. So that becomes a 63. That's my first couplet here. Now, if you did the same thing for the rest of that number, you'd end up with this V2 9929. Now, that number means something to me, but it doesn't mean anything to anybody else. But I thought it would be useful, and it would be easy for me to do it because I know the other number, and then I could convert from V4 to V6. I made a whole bunch of zeros. All these are available to me, but I didn't need them, so I just put zeros in for it. And the reason I did that is there's a shorthand that you could take as many zeros as are line up in one line and replace them with one of these, a couple colons there, and they're all gone. So now my address became that. But you notice this last zero here, I couldn't put it in there because it was important for that particular little section. So I could take zeros off the top, but not off the bottom. So I could take the zeros off the top of this F and just leave them out. That's kind of like you wouldn't put 300 if you wanted, you would say 300 and it'd be assumed. That's the way that you handle the conversions. I just wanted to talk about that in case anybody had any trouble with it. But I don't think anybody here will. You've all been around more than I have on this stuff. Here's how I did my routing. I didn't have a whole lot of routing to do. My problem was I needed to be able to route to my tunnel, to get my tunnel to convert everybody's over. So I had to have a routing entry, and it started out, they gave me this number, and these hex numbers that were there were the numbers that my tunnel supplier gave me. It's how they wanted it to go. And when I got into this stuff, I said, hey, that would be great. I could use, there's that many of them, I could have used those with my regular number. And then I find out about 6RD. And by gosh, that's the way that they're assigning the numbers. They put them up there on the top, and I put my V4 number up there for those same ones. They had a little change in it, and it would work great. So obviously I head off and I put it all in, and I do all the stuff. It was terrible. I mean, my experience was bad. Did you ever have any good?
I've done IXP stuff.
Okay. Anyway, I put this in. This goes through. I gave it this name. This is my name. I could have given it anything. I gave it 6XS because that's where I got it from. And it's actually in the kernel. And I had to do this. This kind of made a difference to me. Instead of a 1500 MTU, I had to go to 1428 because when you encapsulate it in the V4 header takes some of my area that I had. So my packets are a little smaller, but I don't normally send great big files anyway. And the way it sends them, they send them fast enough, it doesn't make any difference. I set up a little bridge in my computer, and that bridge took all of my virtual machines that I had in there. It picked up all of my laptops, things on the outside, and it picked up all the other plugged-in ones that went through my DHCP. And when I hooked up to them, I just put a 1500 on it. So I said, regular message transmission unit of 1500 bytes, and it worked just fine. Now, when it goes through the router will do whatever it has to do to make it fit without sending fractured packets through it. And then I set up a default because the other end, this number here was my end of the tunnel. And my tunnel going the other way, I had to send it out through the one that actually gets to them. So I had to set that one up. And that one obviously had to go with 1428. If I'm going too fast, ask me any question, but I'm just trying to tell you what's going on.
Do you guys understand MTUs? Everybody?
Where'd you come up with your hop count? Did they give it to you?
Pardon?
Where'd you come up with your hop limit? Did they give it to you?
It came out. When I set it up, the interface, it just popped. And their 6S gave me a little configuration thing, and Hurricane Electric did. They told me what I had to do on my end, and really it just sets up a little SIT interface.
So that hop limit is a very specific thing to IPv6, which basically will count the hop location through the path from you and back, so you can actually make sure nobody's monitoring you in the. So it's a feature.
This is all a secured thing under V6. So it's a little different setup. I think it's pretty neat, and it's enough things that I kind of rely upon There is obscurity in the numbers. I mean, somebody has to find the number. And then what I do is I put a firewall on every machine, and I only let through the things that that machine sent out. So I don't get any origination coming into them.
Each machine is added within.
Yeah. So so there's a firewall on each one of the individual, except for the Chromecast, because I couldn't figure out how to get in that, but I figured it'd take care of itself. If I turn off my machine, or I tell my Chromecast to go to a YouTube thing, it'll actually, I can turn off my machine or my phone or whatever's being connected there, and the Chromecast will still play the YouTube. It's a separate connection between YouTube and that. It isn't even through my system, even though I made the connection through my browser. So that's kind of interesting. I thought it was interesting. On my local area thing, since this land just talks to itself, I said I have no reason to put numbers on it. So I didn't give them any numbers. I just let it use its regular FE80, which is its link local address. And so it runs through and does this link local stuff. So it puts the stuff back and forth. Not much more to talk about there. The bridge is kind of an interesting thing, because the bridge has to pick up all those things and bring them together. And so I had to give it an address, and I said, okay, most of my stuff is going to be machine to machine in my own office, so I don't have to do anything to leave it all V6. So it had an Ethernet address of this here, and what it does, I set up for part of it. I set up this two different V4 areas, if you talk about. One was a 196.160. I used 102.9, and you notice this says 16 instead of 24. That's probably wrong.
That's Class C. That's correct.
Pardon?
That's Class C. That's correct.
Yeah, but what I did is I also have another one that I use within my machine myself, which is 122 for my virtual machines coming down. I tied them up together. So what happens is all the machines are actually on the same bridge here. All the virtual machines and everything else. They all have an individual address, a V4 address, but they also have an individual V6 address. So my XP and the accounting thing has a V6 address. The browser works. If I go to Facebook, it comes up with the V6 address. When I tried to get the printout for this meeting tonight, I went down the machine and I got this little thing that came out from SLUUG here, and my machine puts out the address it came from, and it's a V6 address, and it had a funny deal on it. So I asked Andrew, "Who is that?" And he says, "That's 1E100net, which is a Google."
Google's backbone network is on a domain, which is kind of funny. It is 1 to the power of 100. Google.
I didn't know what that stood for. He took care of that little thing. That's one of the problems with being an old guy that looks at the details and says, "What is that?" That's the kind of guy you want checking the code by. Anyway, I had this set up as we go through. I think this makes sense. I think people understand what I'm doing here. Just on this bridge, I have all of this is my full group. I call it 128 because this one specific address. I started to use a bunch of different ones, but the problem was every interface that sent picked up its own interface for its source address, and it gave me a little trouble on my connection. So I finally ended up just saying, I'm only going to use one, and I'll deprecate all the other ones. That was kind of the problem. I ran into a little problem today I will talk about and move on here. The tunnel itself, it's actually a point-to-point tunnel. And it has an MTU of 1428, as we talked about. It has my end of the tunnel is actually given this address, their specific code, which is not mine. This is theirs. And they send it to 2. They send it to me. That's the way I receive it. And then when I send it to them, I have to send it to 1. See, so they have a whole thing set up where I get it on 2, I have to send it back to them on 1. The problem was, in my mailer, when my send mail, I use send mail, tried to send the thing out, it would say that it was coming from 2. And when it did that, what would happen is Gmail, Comcast, and a couple of other ones would say that my RDNS doesn't match my domain name, so it blew everything out of the water. But checking that out, this took me a long time.
So in IPv4, this is called a 31-bit network. Are any of you guys familiar with doing a 31-bit provider network? So that's when you have 2 IP addresses, the smallest network you can make, 31-bit. And that's where you have the network from you, the ISP, to the customer. That's a 31-bit network. And that's what they're doing here, is they're basically saying, we're 1, we're the router, you're 2, you're the customer. This network is only used for this purpose, for us to talk to each other.
Now, it seems to me, being an old guy and being around here a long time, they have a jillion other addresses. They could use 3 and 4 for the next customer, 5 and 6, but nobody ever does that. It's always 1 and 2. I guess that's because there's 14 billion of them, so they don't really care. At any rate, when I put it back and I go to them, I went to what I call anywhere in anywhere. I think it's that AYIYA, I think they call it. But what that is a UDP connection. So it's only, it is not a TCP, it's a UDP, so it's a little higher overhead that I have on it. But I can use it from any machine, and it doesn't pay any attention to the natting and all of that, because it's really initiated from me. So if I go into McDonald's and set this up, I get a UDP connection to my tunnel provider, and then it comes back and it sets up the connection from the other side. And now I have an IPv6 out of McDonald's at my little thing. And what happened is, when I was complaining to AT&T, there's a guy from AT&T that called me, and he said, well, the problem is, if you want static addresses, you have to go up to the 45 megahertz service, and you're going to have to pay more money, and then we give it. But since you're not buying that, we're not going to give you V6, so that's why we blocked 41, and we're totally within our rights. So I have been looking for a different ISP. But basically, I decided that if I work strictly without using my address at all, I can change to anybody. So that's what I'm in the process of doing at this time. I don't know if that makes any sense. The virtual bridge, on the other hand, it starts out with this 122, which is my virtual machines that are in there, and it also said I just set up a 24 for them. I only had 2 of them, so I said that wouldn't bother me any. And then the individual machines each get their own virtual part of that network, and it ties into the bridge. Did somebody count all those? So
they used up all your ideas.
What we ended up here, we have a couple of Ethernet addresses, and these came from who knows where. They generate them inside the machine. I finally gave up trying to pay any attention to it. I do know that a lot of times this FFFE, that first 24 bits, is right out of the MAC address. Then you have the FFFE, and then the last 24 bits is the rest of the MAC address. So if you ever need a MAC address, it should be in there. Except that some machines kind of cheat you a little bit, and they decide they're going to obscure that by adding some random number to it. But once it's assigned, it's the same for that interface from there on out. And that takes care of the virtual bridge. Oh, you might notice that everything is 1500 there on those virtual ones because they're all within. I don't have to worry about any. There's nothing done as far as sending these anywhere else. So I don't know if this. I'm running CentOS in my machine. I like it. It works great. I don't have too much of a problem. But I have ETH0 is my ISP. It's a 2-wire 3800 provided by AT&T. My ETH1 is my LAN that went out to all of my machines and the WRT54. So it did all of the wiring. But the 54 didn't do its own stuff. Everything was working like a hub there. It was tied together. So those are the only two interfaces that I really had. See, because everything else was virtual. That was carried through the bridge. So now I had to route the bridge, and I had to configure the bridge. And the bridge is, I just told it it's V6. It has that address, that same address. Remember, that's my 63B29929, which is my regular 99.153. You know, it's the same address, 128. And then I have to tell it that it's IPv6, so it forwarded. And I said, this will work wonderful. Well, CentOS does a lot of things for me. I used to be Slackware, and it used to take me quite a bit of time to get it set up because I had to set up everything. But CentOS does a lot of this for me in this script, so I was saying I would like to use CentOS. But CentOS has a little problem. And the problem I ran into is that CentOS doesn't really think that any rational person is going to have the router and the NAT in the same box along with the V6 workstation. And they just didn't consider that case. So the problem is that my router advertisement, which assigns all of my prefixes to my machines, won't work if forwarding is not enabled. But the auto-configure part of it, when it tries to give out addresses, won't work if it is. So it's kind of you're going to lose on one side or the other. So normal booting works because they sequence it. But if I try to restart the network with the service network restart type command, it just went gunny bag on me. That's a West Coast term, by the way. So what I ended up doing is I ended up writing a little adjustment that I put in my init file. Actually, CentOS 6 uses a regular System 5 type thing. CentOS 5 used that System D. I had a lot of trouble with that System D setup. So I kind of like the System 5 better. But that's what I'm working with now, so I have to live with it. This is the actual little routine I put up to do it. I put this little thing in here. And it's not much of a routine, but I call it for my service network restart type thing. And I added it in after they decided that everything was working fine. And all I did was I went ahead and turned on forwarding for both V4 and V6. And then I figured out whether my router advertisement was running. And if it was, I told it to restart. And if it wasn't, I told it to start. So that was just a little thing to do it, and that was it. And then I set up a static route to go to that bridge interface, and I just do that automatically. And this one here, I put into a cron tab every minute. It checks that there's a route, and if there's not a route, it restarts. It sets the route back up again. That worked great in the past. With my new system, because they're not all going through one place, I have to do a little work on this yet. I can start them up individually. But I'm thinking that I'll just let each one handle itself. Anyway, my DNS, I'm using Bind 910. I kind of like being on that front edge of it, and it's fun because I'm involved with the discussion group there. And I have a DNS secured system, so I use my RRSIGs and all that stuff in there, and that's been kind of fun to set up. I'm going to get rid of all of that. I'm going to move that off to one of my virtual machines outside, maybe give it to DigitalOcean. Problem is DigitalOcean doesn't do V6 right now. So FirstNet did, and I've had trouble with them. They moved me out of Miami, they moved me up to Chicago, they moved me to some place, and then in the middle of the night, they moved all the machines out to Charlotte or something. So I don't know whether they're in any kind of shape to go. But right now, all of my public traffic came in through the one. This is before I chopped that off. And the V6 came through the other. And I ran a name server for a long time. and it didn't have a whole lot of traffic speed. But I thought this was kind of interesting. I only put certain ones. So this is about 1.25 million hits that we had, 1,280,000 hits that I had on my little network at home, if you can believe that. 88% of the hits were from my own internal machines, see? So most of it wasn't outside. There was only 12% of that. There's 153,000, and this was, I don't know how long this was, a month and a half or 2 months, something like that. But of that outside stuff, I said, how many of these queries actually hit me through V6? And my internal ones were 100%. Well, it was set up that way, so that's what I had. But the external, I had a 6.2, and that I think is more than the general percentage that's on the thing. However, since I'm dealing with people who are corresponding with me and I'm using it on my side, I'm obviously going to get questions back to my thing. So that's probably a little bit bigger than normal. But I thought that was kind of interesting. The other thing that was of interest to me, and probably not to anyone else, is these text hits that I got were all SPF stuff, the Sender Policy Format thing that was set up years ago. They told me I was going to have to make an SPF record. So I have SPF records. But I practically no hits on the SPF record. And they've been deprecated now. I think they're talking about taking them.
The RFC was deprecated, however, some systems are still using them. You're supposed to reduplicate it to the
I
text.
duplicate it. I have it. If I don't, I get a little error, I think, when it's...
We're talking about Sender Policy Framework. You guys familiar with SPF?
You're saying it's deprecated now in favor of what?
Duplicating it in multiple text records because the text record standard.
Oh, okay.
The SPF was never ratified. Or it was never completely absorbed by the community. So they just said, take your SPF, put it in the text.
Now, right now, SendMail I had working pretty good. It took all my SMTP, everything came in V6 that was asked, that wanted to. But ISC.org, Gmail, both of those pretty much were all that way. It was interesting. ISC, which is Internet Systems Consortium, I guess it is, somewhere out of California, Australia, who knows where they are.
San Mateo.
But they're a very interesting company, and they really lambasted this, and I was running V6 and V6, and all of a sudden they changed their mail server, and it all came in V4. And so I said, gee, that's funny, maybe there's something wrong with V6. So after about a month of that, I sent a note into them saying, is there something wrong why I shouldn't be using this? I noticed that you're not using it. And I got a thing back on Friday night from some supervisor that says, I can't believe we're not using V6. He says, we will have V6 as soon as I can get it changed, but not on Friday night.
Was this Leo or Paul?
I don't remember who it was. It wasn't Paul. But anyway, they ended up changing it because Saturday morning, they must have done it in the middle of the night, but Saturday morning it all came in on V6. I have some problems, and I still have problems with Comcast Net. Comcast has different regional things that they get, and I don't know why they turned down my V6 address, but I have a feeling it's because they know it's a tunnel, you know, maybe the address or whatever. At any rate, I just set up mailer table things that says look up that. If it's them, you know, send it on V4. And that's the way it's been running. I don't have any more. We're going to talk about this guy. This guy, Owen DeLong at HENet, has all kinds of things you can self-study. He offers ones you can spend lots of money on. But I found him to be very helpful, some of the stuff he read. And being a somewhat long-term guy on this, I like reading documentation, and so I spend a lot of time doing that kind of stuff. And this was a wonderfully fun thing when I first put it up last year. And when I ran into trouble, I ended up meeting this guy over here at, where was that place? Someplace in Kirkwood.
Yeah.
I went down to a meeting because they had a meeting. I was going to ask him, how do I get my V6? And I walked in there, and he said, I know nothing about V6. But then the next thing you know, they shut down the group. You know, so I ended up coming in. I have nothing else. You got any questions? Yes.
You said that you couldn't have a But was it a bridge and a workstation in the same?
No, I didn't say you couldn't. I said that what happens is the standard initiation things that center, they didn't figure that people would.
What I was thinking was, could you have had one of them in a VM so they wouldn't be interacting?
Well, I did have one in the VM.
So the RADVD is like a broadcast DHCP server.
Mhm.
It actually pushes addresses on people.
Okay.
It's really kind of nifty stuff. But if you have IPv forward set up, if you have IPv6 forwarding enabled, it kind of gets scared that it's going to issue addresses to the entire
world.
internet. Yeah. And so that's why it doesn't want to do that.
Oh.
Anyway, it gave me fits. I finally got it working by doing this. I only rebooted the thing about once a month, so it wasn't a big deal. And the rest of the time, I just did a service network restart.
It seems like all the local discovery sort of has a chance of making all your workstations publicly addressable.
They are.
Yeah, they are.
They are. That's why you have to have a firewall on anything that connects that way. I think. I don't know.
How do you turn it off?
What do you mean, how do you-
What?
If I've got 20 Windows workstations in an office, I'm sure as hell not giving them a public address.
Well, I'll tell you what my problem is. I didn't have trouble with people coming in and finding them. I had trouble with people who would come in and answer emails that said they were offering them some wonderful thing. I have my son offered a wonderful thing was a checking account, which ended up losing $5,000 from it for what happened. But so the problem was more with the operator than it was with the system, as far as I'm concerned.
But the point is, you never run a Windows machine with a public IP. Yes.
Yeah, but so IPv4 was never intended to have that.
So how do you do that with IPv6?
Well, you wouldn't. It was never part of the design spec. The same with IPv4.
So you're saying
IPv6 firewall in front of everything.
No. Haven't you ever heard of KISS?
Keep it simple.
I'm not going to set up a firewall if I can just run them on that. The best security for a Windows system is run them on a private IP. Why can't you do it with IPv6?
Well, that's a Windows problem. It's not an issue. From an IXP point of view, you just broadcast and you just do bandwidth filtering, you do throttling, and you just control that stuff. So, I mean, pushing this out on a national network, we got that. We got the virus-laden machines pushing on through, and we just basically had to put in a drop list, put in band list, and just kind of control the traffic.
So that means everybody with a Windows machine is sitting there naked in front of every hacker on the internet.
Everybody with Roku, everybody with anything is automatically broadcast on.
The Internet of Things.
Yeah, I mean, you can go down to some of these coffee shops with AT&T service in town, and you will get an IPv6 address on your machine while you're there that is globally addressable.
Once you turn off the IPv6
Yeah,
protocol.
but why would one want to do that?
Well, because it's called security.
I'm sorry?
It's called security.
Yeah, I've got security.
This is a good time to turn it over to Andrew to answer. I just put a firewall on every one of them.
How do we deal with it?
That has got to be the most stupid asinine network concept I've ever seen.
That is how IPv4 was written.
Well, I don't care how it was written, I'm talking about how it's implemented.
Well, yeah, for IPv4 is a band-aid, IPv4 is a problem.
I don't care if it's a Band-Aid or not, it's the best security for a Windows workstation.
Well,
Can I-
no, it's the best security that you've got to implement today. It's probably arguably not the best way to.
Well, it's the first layer of security.
Sure.
That's a long time.
The first layer of security is don't give it a public IP. And I guarantee you, I'm never walking into a network that puts public IPs on a Windows workstation. That is absolutely stupid. The concept. A firewall is the second level of security, not the first.
What's the first?
No public access. Inbound. The first level of security is always no inbound access.
No. First rule of security is
Is this
no
all no network?
Microsoft.
Right.
No
The
disk.
second one is no public access. The third one is the firewall.
Okay, so let's just jump through some fun stuff real quick.
Why don't we pick it up because you're only going to be able to talk for.
Yeah, I'm going to jump through fun stuff, okay? Not difficult stuff, fun stuff. So I was racking my brain on how to explain how big the addressing scheme is, and I actually came up with this last night and had a lot of laughter about it. Is that all of these your mama jokes? Your mama so big? IPv6 is actually bigger than your mama. If you don't get that, that's fine, but it was a moment of brilliance.
Now.
Supposedly it's bigger than all the stars in the galaxy and all the sand on all the seashores.
Right. It's big. It's really big, and I was trying to find a funny way that wasn't like overused.
It is so big. How big is it?
It's bigger than your mama. Okay, so one thing that Super David here touched on was the local link or the link local address, and this is basically saying, hey, everyone that's on my LAN gets this address scheme, so that I can find out who's on my local LAN, just like ARP will let you do. And localhost, I just threw this in here. I typed this up while David was talking. So localhost is just ::1. A lot easier to type than your old 127 stuff. So if you ever need to deal with anything that's localhost, it's just ::1. So when you're looking at software configuration like postfix or something, and you see ::1, and you're sitting there and you're wondering if it's some type of new markup, you're like, oh, it's just an IPv6 address. So if you ever want to test, you can just search. There's these testing sites which actually test your connection via IPv6, the DNS via IPv6, how your traffic is routed, your MTUs and stuff like that. It's pretty fun. I'm going to try to post all this information to the mailing list or put the presentations up later. Okay, so how do I type an IPv6 address? So, you can have these little, you can have these little colons to shorten everything up, but if you ever need to type it into a browser or sometimes on the command line, you have to put it in brackets. And you'll be bashing your head against the board the first time you hit this. When you want to type it in your own browser, you check your web server.
It's basically delimited for specific for V6.
Specific for V6. And it basically, if you started typing this into a browser, the first thing it does is wonders if F440 is a port.
Looks like a port.
No, because it's Leonard's phone, Leonard.
Yeah. So this bracket is this IPv6 thing. Basically, hey, I'm putting an address in here. Okay. There's an RFC. There's several of them, but it's actually pretty easy to read this one. It's a lot better than IPv4's. DNS. David touched on some of this stuff, but I wanted to touch upon some DNS. So this is my IPv4 address over here. And a quad A record kind of looks just like a normal record, except the address is back there. Reverse records, where the industry is really having a hard time catching up with getting reverse records correct. So this is a correct reverse record. So this is taking a IPv6 address and presenting it back to the domain. And this is where a lot of companies are failing pretty hard.
Are those digits or what? X?
Those are digits. Yeah.
I mean, but
it could have been X. It could have been X.
Those are hex digits?
Or no, wait. Give me a moment here.
But that doesn't seem. Oh, but that's not supposed to be 2001.
No. This was just me pulling it out of something real quick. So let's jump over here. So, for example, for some of my websites, I have an address here. I have my reverse DNS here. So this address is reversed back to me, and this gives me the trust for email and lots of other things. So all of my domain names go to this, and the domain names are reversed backwards. So this is a huge trick, and it's kind of hard to do. And I use a company by the name of Pair. And they're pretty much the best IPv6 host out there at the moment. So, and they're cheap. 6-access, this is what David was talking about. This is a global organization that sets up points of peering so that you can learn about IPv6 and not have to really go invest in, buying an IPv6 link or peering with somebody. So this is where you can come here. They actually have great documentation, a wiki, all kinds of fun stuff. Really great stuff. I have worked in my past with internet exchange points, and so these are the mix in between an ISP and web hosting. These are the points where we take all of the bandwidth and bottle it up and then redistribute it back out.
We better watch it.
I know, I'm rock and rolling as best I can. MTU, minimum transmission unit, I think everybody kind of understood this. Where was this thing at? So Facebook had a joke with their IPv6 address. They actually have Facebook in their address. A couple companies are doing this with their names.
Like Google.
It's kind of funny. So one thing that David touched upon was called a super network, and that's when you have several networks inside of each other, but they're all addressable to each other. And that's kind of a hack. It's kind of fun to do on IPv4, so you can actually have a 24-bit inside of a 16-bit and be able to talk to each other. It is quite a useful tool in the large network rollout, but it's also very dangerous and confusing. Anything to anything, that was that term. I'm sorry? Anything in anything, I'm sorry. And automatic IPv6 connectivity client utility was the other toy. And the other thing is that if you go to code.he.net, so that's Hurricane Electric, they do have a IPv6 training course. And they also have lots of languages and other fun things. This is great. This is all free. You can go in there and you can basically learn Python or Ruby or PHP or Perl or just learn some of these languages, but they also will take you through a class, and they will walk you through it so that you understand. It's not about some certification you have to pay for. Everything's free, everything's fun, and Hurricane Electric does a really, really great job of making sure that everything's free and fun.
How many stages we got in Missouri?
I don't know.
2 minutes?
A bunch, probably.
2 minutes, 15 seconds.
So,
No, 1 minute, 15 seconds. What is it, 10?
okay, so there we go. Other than Lee's security question, is there any things we should talk about in the minute seconds we have left?
Firewalling would be a good.
And so, yeah, typically what you're going to do is just going to do bandwidth monitor, bridge, packet filter, that type of stuff. Same thing you should be doing in IPv4 anyway. So.
Okay, 2 last issues then. First off, David, thank you very much. And our usual speaker presentation, our unusual speaker presentation. Thank you. You're welcome. Something quickly I forgot during the announcements. You know anything about that VM Unix meeting tomorrow night? We just put it on the calendar, I think, yesterday, but there's a VM user group that's actually... pardon me?
Is it VMware's user group?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
So,
I know about it, I'm not
okay.
Where is it? Did you say it's on the calendar?
It is on the calendar. It just got put there early this morning or something, or last night. What did you say about it?
Where is it?
Oh, where is it? I don't remember. You remember?
Look on the
calendar.
Look on the calendar.
Yeah.
So.
Search
Okay.
for St. Louis Beacon on your favorite search engine works.
No, I mean the address is on the calendar and stuff, so it's out there,
Yeah.
the URL for it. So. And Andrew, thank you very much as well. So.
Ever heard of RFC 41?